What's up guys, it's Mark here, hope you're all doing really well. Today I want to make a quick video and talk to you guys about drawing skulls. This is something I get asked about a lot, and obviously if you follow any of my work you see that I draw a ton of skulls. It's one of my favorite things to draw, so I thought today just sort of make a tutorial and show you guys how I draw them. There's just infinite number of ways that you could draw a skull, so I would just say that up front that there's a lot of ways you can do it. You do it however you want. This is just how I do it. So I'm not saying it's the best way, it's just the way that I've learned to do them. So as you can see, this is a skull that I've drawn just recently. And one of the things I love about skulls is that you can draw them in just so many different ways. You can really manipulate the shapes, make the nose small, the eyes really big, or vice versa, extend the jaw out, do all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's a really cool way that you can make your own style, which is what I've tried to do with mine. So I think the very first thing we need to do before we get too stuck into this is just take a look at a couple of reference images. So I've got a couple of images off the internet here. This one's just a skull, and then I've got like a 3D modeled head here that you can see from a couple of different angles as well. So I think one of the things that's kind of intimidating about first learning to draw skulls, especially, this is something that I found kind of intimidating, is it looks really, really detailed and it looks a bit complex. There's bones everywhere and cracks and different crevices and stuff. And you're like, how am I going to remember where all of those go and all that kind of thing? So I think the thing you have to remember is that you really can, just like with anything that you draw, you can break this whole thing down into really, really basic shapes. So the first thing I would say is that I always think about this side of the head here. So if you look at this reference image of a head here, the side of the head is actually quite flat, and people who are newer to drawing skulls usually draw them quite round, almost like a spherical shape, and that's what makes them not quite look right. So I think I always think about the side of the head, and that always dictates the position of the skull and which way it's facing. So it's one of the things that I think about first, like I have here, is just where I'm going to draw the side of the head. So remember that it's flat, it's not spherical. So I think when you look at a skull, really you just break it down into basic shapes, like I said. So the way that I think about it is like this. The side of the head is flat. It always determines the direction that the head is facing, in my opinion. So it's one of the first things that I draw, which I'll show you in a minute when I draw some actual skulls. So if we look at the side of the head, I'm just going to draw a circle here. And then if we look at the rest of the skull, we just want to break it down into simple shapes, right? So we've got eyes, they're just two circles. The nose here is just a triangle. And just break it down into some really simple shapes. So I've actually already gone ahead and drawn some really, really faint lines that I'll show you guys here. So as you can see, circles and triangles, that's all there is to it. And then if I just hide this reference image real quick, you can see here that this is really the foundation of how to draw any kind of skull. So if this is the first time that you've ever drawn a skull, I would actually recommend doing exactly what I've just done here. I would grab a photo off the internet, grab yourself a good reference image. You could even use a photograph of a human rather than a skull, and just start drawing in those basic shapes. Then ditch the reference image, you're left with the shapes, then try and build the rest of the skull by yourself and try and tweak some of these shapes and make things look a bit weirder and a bit more different. So if I just jump back, I'll put the reference image back in real quick. So I've done the same thing down here with the actual 3D modeled head. It's a slightly different shape to the real skull that I just showed you before, but again, if we look at this, circle where the eye socket would be, triangle where the nose would be, just up here, and then another circle, and then again the jaw quite square. I draw sort of a line here, jaw kind of starts here, comes out, and so on. So just focus on breaking down those really, really basic shapes like that. And as you can see, it starts to build out and look a bit more like a skull. And then if I hide I drew that straight on the reference image, but it's all right, I've got another copy anyway. So if I hide the reference image real quick, and as you can see, this is the one I drew earlier. So it's still very much the same. And then you could easily use this and just draw it into a proper skull without having to actually trace someone else's work or something like that. And that's a really good way to just get more familiar with drawing skulls before you actually start freehanding them and stuff like that. In fact, I might even use a couple of these when I do some examples in just a minute. Okay, so I've just quickly paused the video, got rid of the reference images, and I've got these basic sketches back on the screen now. So I realized as well if you look at the skulls that I draw compared to these, you know, rough shapes that I've drawn here, a natural skull, a real skull, is kind of taller and a bit more elongated and a bit thinner than the style that I usually draw them in, and you might be a bit confused by that. So I was just thinking one way that you could quite easily, you know, start working on a style like that if you wanted them to be a bit more in that kind of tattoo looking style that I do is you could simply trace a reference image like I did here with the basic shapes. I'm just going to duplicate this real quick so I can show you. And what you can do is actually just skew these a little bit, scale them down so that they're a little bit more stretched. And that would actually still serve as a pretty good foundation for drawing a skull in the same kind of style that I do. So I think what we'll do is, before I freehand any skulls or anything like that, it probably makes sense for me to actually demonstrate using these and turning them into actual, you know, realistic, well not realistic, but you know, proper, fully, completely drawn skulls. So I'm just going to change colors real quick. I'm going to go with the yellow for this, and I'll just lower the opacity so these aren't quite as visible. And just as a quick side note, I've always noticed over time that I seem to be much better at drawing skulls that are facing one direction or one side rather than the other. So you can always just draw it facing the way that you're comfortable with, then duplicate it, and then just, you know, reflect it in Photoshop and it's facing the other way. So not really a big deal. Okay, so let's start building out this skull a little bit more now. So we have our really basic shapes. We know where our eyes are, where our nose is, where our mouth, jaw is, etc. So I usually start with, well, I mean, I draw the circle on the side of the head. That's fine where it is. I'm not going to really change that for now. The next thing I think about are the eyes and the nose. So I'm just going to go ahead and start building in this nose a little bit more, I think. So just drop the opacity a bit. Sorry if this is loud. So when I draw the nose, it usually does sort of come up a little bit in the middle like that. So I'll give that a little bit of that look and then bring that up. Now, when we look at the actual skull, we sort of have the, I think it's called the bridge of the nose there as well. So it would actually kind of curve up a little bit more like that if we were doing it a bit more realistically. And part of this eye over here, which is, you know, on our left, but it's actually the right eye, would actually be hidden by some of the nose. So we wouldn't actually be able to see the entire thing. I'm just going to go ahead and draw this one in a bit more where it was as well. So since I'm already thinking about the eyes a lot, I'm actually just going to go ahead. In fact, let's just really quickly fill these in a little bit because they would be dark in there inside the skull. So the next thing I want to do is start thinking about the brow and the forehead a little bit more. So one thing that I always do is I draw the brow line just following the shape of the eye. So I kind of just follow it like this. That adds a bit of an eyebrow sort of look to it, and then this one a bit more. And now, depending again on the angle and the style you want to draw it, I usually don't have the eye come all the way to the edge of the skull like this. I draw around the outside of it like that, as you'll see if you look at a lot of my skulls. Again, depends on the style. I've seen plenty of cool skulls that just use the eye as the outside as well. So that's totally up to you. But I'm going to go ahead and just draw that back in the way I had it before. Okay, cool. Sometimes I like to do the same along here a little bit. Okay. So the next thing I like to do is from the brow, draw up onto the forehead a little bit more. So usually it wouldn't be quite so straight up like that. So I kind of draw a little bit of a line like this to kind of build up out a bit and then follow the shape of the skull around to the back. And then where we have our cheekbones, I like to just bring them down a little bit like this and put them a little bit more of a round sort of edge to them. Again, depends on the style I feel like drawing, but I'm just going to draw it in like that. Now the one on the other side is sometimes a little bit tricky to draw. So I usually just start by drawing a little bit of a cheekbone there and then kind of following this way. And then I bring it down like this. I'm just going to really quickly draw in the rest of this circle in case I end up hiding this pink reference, shapes underneath. and that would usually be filled in as well in my style, but again, that's up to you. And I usually like to add a couple little detail lines just to add some shape underneath the eyes where the cheekbones are, a bit more depth to it. So I can add a couple in here like that. And now I'm just going to quickly hide these reference sketches, just have a quick look at how things are going. Yep, so as you can see, it's starting to look a bit more like a skull already, which is good. I'm actually not quite happy with the proportions here. I think this should probably be a little bit further out, maybe, because otherwise the front of the jaw, the top row of teeth are going to be kind of squished together a bit too much for my personal liking. But again, this was based on the proportions of a real skull, not necessarily the style that I draw. So I'll just put that back real quick. And then I like to think about the jaw. I actually draw the teeth in at the very, very end. So I shape the jaw and where the teeth are going to be before I even think about drawing them in. So let's draw the jaw in a bit, just copying what I've already done here really, and then kind of joining it up. There's a bit more of a jaw here. Then inside here, there's kind of this space where the teeth start to wrap around, and then it's sort of in a bit of a shadow because it's kind of underneath the cheekbone on the way sort of around to the back of the jaw there. So I usually end up just filling in a lot of this area black in my style. It's up to you. At the very least, I would probably fill in some of this area, and then these teeth would actually be kind of wrapping around if they were here. So yeah, like I said, up to you. I'm going to just kind of fill in a little bit more of that, I think. And then I'll just quickly, I'm just going to rotate this a bit, make this a bit easier for myself, and draw in roughly where these teeth would be. That's probably a bit of an awkward angle. Cool, now I'm going to hide that sketch again. Our teeth would usually be split somewhere down the middle, like that. So now it looks like it's got a bit of a stupid smile. So I'll fill that in a little bit. Then we might as well just draw the teeth in now. This is up to you. You can do the more realistic or more, unrealistic and simplified like mine if you want. I don't really think too much about making any of the teeth different sizes, even though technically, the front teeth are a bit bigger, and then you've got the molars and stuff that are a bit shorter and wider, whatever. That's up to you. I'm just going to really quickly just add in just some shapes like this. Just drawing where my teeth would kind of sit. If you really want to, you can erase some of these other bits here just to show what it would look a bit more like. Cool. So that's starting to look a bit more like a skull already. You might be thinking this doesn't quite look like my sort of style, but again, that's just because I've based it on an actual photograph, so the proportions are very different. Like the jaw and the teeth are way bigger than the way that I would normally draw a skull. Like if you look at mine, I keep the teeth really small and the jaw is really, really compressed, so it's really quite short as opposed to being so elongated in that realistic image. So I'll just put that back. Cool, so now we pretty much have a completely drawn skull. I'm going to go ahead and just add in a few more detail lines here. So one thing that I like to do in mine is I add a bit more depth to the shape of the jaw. If you want it to be a bit more realistic, you could sort of add a bit more of a curve to it like that. One thing I do a lot of the time is just add sort of a line or a couple of lines that sort of comes down the side of the jaw there. And one thing that I do in my style as well sometimes is to actually extend the jaw up into this side of the head here, even though that's not very realistic at all. I do think it looks pretty cool, so you could sort of have that kind of coming up through here if you wanted to. I might just erase a bit more of this, which can look kind of cool in some styles as well. Again, that's something I did. I'm pretty sure I did that in this one. Yeah, so you can see I did that here in that sketch. I don't really like it in these proportions. When the skull is so tall, it looks a bit weird, so I'm going to get rid of it. But yeah, so that's that. I also like to just add a bit more depth to the front sometimes by just adding in some lines here. You can add in some little dimples and stuff above here as well, if you like, above the front teeth. Let's just see if they're in the photo actually. Yeah, so it's sort of like these lines here is what I was thinking about. and kind of this line along the bottom of the jaw here as well. I'll just quickly put that back where it was. Cool. So yeah, this doesn't look too bad. It's kind of cool, I guess. But this is really just drawing a basic skull. So as I go a bit further here, I want to start breaking this down and really changing things up and making it look a bit weirder. Another thing that you'll notice, actually it's not really in this reference image of the skull, but I do like to add a little bit more depth to my skull sometimes by kind of drawing in a line where the middle of the skull would be going back, so it would kind of follow off. It follows really just off the nose here, off the brow. So I would just follow it up here like that, and that would sort of be down the middle of the skull. Then I would kind of just erase these parts probably. I don't usually connect it all the way like that. And then from here, this is where I like to draw in a lot of the cracks. So I base them off the middle. Let's just fix up this a little bit real quick. And then yeah, you can draw in some weird kind of cracks in whatever sort of shape you want, I guess. That's up to you. And then I would probably just erase some of that part there as well. So yeah, there you have a kind of sort of semi-completed-ish skull.